Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to Normal Day in Russia. I've been using the Huawei Mate 20X and the Xiaomi Mi Mix 3 for 2 weeks now, and I have some thoughts on these devices, mainly that first impressions can sometimes be deceiving. So let's talk about that. Alright, so very quickly, I'd like to go over some of the strengths that I've found with both of these devices over the past 2 weeks, and some of the quirks as well. So first of all, I want to mention the fact that the Huawei Mate 20X has fantastic battery life. This is the return of the 2-day smartphone, my friends. So you can legitimately use this to consume content, take photos, take video, to edit your photos and videos, and not have to worry about your battery at all. You don't have to micromanage your battery usage, and it will definitely last you from the early hours of the morning until the late hours of the evening without question. You will get home after a full day of use and you will still have battery to spare. But if you're careful about your battery use, this phone is definitely gonna last you well into your second day, or maybe even until the end of your second day. And if you turn on extreme power saving mode, that'll translate into even more hours of usage. So the battery management is also really on point. Kudos to Huawei for both putting in a large battery but also doing the work to make sure that the phone doesn't hog any of it. So the processor, I believe, is very good on minimizing battery usage. Also, the Android 9.0 optimizations have done quite a bit to make sure that battery usage is as minimal as possible, as well as the ability to turn on the black user interface, for example, also saves on battery quite a bit. Now, all of these factors kind of play into the fact that this phone is very good about making the most of the large capacity battery that it has. And also Huawei itself, they've implemented a very aggressive, I think, background process killing protocol. So this phone will not allow any of your apps to sort of hog the battery if they haven't been used for a while and if they don't need to be using the battery in general. Another thing that I like is some of the gestures that come with this UI. Now, I generally don't like user interface overlays at all. I prefer to have a stock Android experience. But to be honest, in this case, Huawei has been very careful not to take away at all from stock Android, but they've added quite a few things that I really enjoy. So the customization options are pretty great. So for example, if I wanted to take a screenshot, all I'd have to do is double click the screen with my knuckle, and there we go, I have a screenshot. Say I wanted to take a screenshot of just a particular area of the screen, so I use my knuckle to draw a square or a circle or whatever freeform around the object that I want, and then I can screenshot that particular region of the screen. There are also quick launch app shortcuts, so if I wanted to launch the camera, I could just draw a C. If I wanted to open up music, I can draw an M. I have maps set to W just because that seems to work better. And you can also launch multitasking, so when you launch your browser and you draw across the screen with your knuckle, you can launch multitasking that way, although I find that's kind of hit or miss. That doesn't always work, and in general, it's pretty easy to launch multitasking anyway. The next two features that I really like about this phone are the screen and the sound, the audio performance. So again, the screen does not have the highest resolution in the world, but it is a very bright, it is a very high quality screen. It allows you to zoom in quite a bit. It allows you to look at the details of your photo. It's more than adequate enough for basic photo editing that you would like to do. No phone is perfect for this purpose anyway. This should be done on a PC if possible. And it is very bright. The colors are very rich. It's a pleasure to use outside, and the brightness has a lot of variance to it. So at night when it's late in the evening and you're in bed, you're not going to blind yourself. Like I'm not even sure that you can see that, but the screen is still on. So I do like the variance and brightness that you have with the screen. The speakers on this phone, they're very loud. They're of a very high quality. So the audio quality is great. It's clear and it's crisp. There aren't any shrieking noises. You can put it down on your table. You can go to the next room, and it'll feel kind of like you're listening to a large, high-quality portable speaker, really. So I have no issues with that. But if you maintain the stock settings for your phone when you go into sounds and you go into Dolby Atmos, so you cannot turn off Dolby Atmos completely when you're in stereo speaker mode. But I find that when you have the smart mode turned on, especially if you're listening to YouTube videos, for example, it'll seem like the right side speaker is much louder than the left side speaker. Like the left speaker is barely basically barely working. It feels like kind of a 60-40 distribution between the speakers, which was it was uncomfortable to listen to. But that's kind of gone away since I've switched it to music mode and turned the equalizer to off. So that seems to have reconciled the situation. So definitely have a look at the Dolby Atmos settings. And the last thing that I want to mention, obviously, is the camera. You can't talk about this phone without talking about the camera. It does take excellent photographs, very high quality photographs with an extremely high resolution. But so many good things have been said about this camera that at this point I'm going to switch over to the quirks of this phone. So again, it is a great camera, don't get me wrong. I enjoy using it. I've taken some fantastic photos of Moscow and of my kids with this camera. But I believe this camera was just overhyped. Out of the box, the phone is set to 10 megapixels. If you just grab this phone and start taking photos, when you get home and you look over them, you're going to find that you don't have the quality you were expecting. You have to actually go into your settings and set it to 40 megapixels to get the most out of this sensor. But the interesting thing about that is when you switch over to 40 megapixels, you can no longer switch to your telephoto lens or to your super wide angle lens. So here's the difference. You can't zoom in or you can't zoom out. Whereas if I had still set it to 10 megapixels, you can switch over to the super ultra wide lens over here, or switch over to 3 times telephoto over here as well. So these options completely disappear when you set your camera to 40 megapixel mode. Now, as far as the AI itself is concerned, I have to say, the first thing you're going to feel when you get this phone and you take a few photos, especially if you're coming over from an older device without the AI that most new phones seem to have nowadays, you're going to get the feeling that this camera is just magic. It really does feel magical. It does feel incredibly impressive when you first get the camera. But then you kind of start paying more attention to the little nuances and the details, and you realize that its performance, especially with the AI technology, is all over the place. A good example of that would be portraits. When you're trying to take a portrait of your kids, or when you're trying to take a shot of several people in general, the AI is going to do its best to blur the background behind your subject. But when you have multiple subjects, I found that the camera begins to hunt for what it's supposed to blur and what it's supposed to keep in focus. If you want to get steady, high-quality shots out of this camera, if you don't want to have to deal with the AI trying to figure out what kind of scene you're using, you have to turn the master AI off. Now, if you have adequate time to take out your phone to kind of frame the subject, if your subject isn't a little child that likes to run around and run away from the camera, then yes, the master AI will probably be a pretty cool function for you, because it is very good at figuring out what kind of scene you're shooting. It is very good at automatically detecting that, but you need to give it some time. You need to give it a couple of seconds, and you need to have a subject that isn't intent on running away at the first convenience. So the camera, like I said, it is very impressive when it's at its best, but it can also be an inconvenience when it's at its worst. Still, like I said, I want to be clear on this. The camera is of a very high quality. It is very impressive. All right, so as far as the Mi Mix 3 is concerned, I want to repeat the first thing that I said when I unboxed this phone. It feels really great in the hand. So that's probably one of the biggest strengths that this phone has. Its form factor. I really appreciate the build quality. I really appreciate the way that the device looks, especially when it's outside of the case. All of that is great. It's fantastic. But just the proportions of it, the size of it, the way it feels in hand, your one finger stretch from one diagonal to the other side of the screen is very easy. You don't ever really need to use your second hand. The entirety of the screen is completely accessible with one hand, even if you don't have the biggest hands in the world. This is probably the perfect one-size-fits-all phone size that you're looking for. This is the screen size that you're looking for. And again, non-rounded corners, because in this way, you're allowed to use the entirety of the screen. Whatever apps you're in, it doesn't matter if you're in some sort of photo or video editing app, you're going to be able to use the bottom edges and top edges of the screen when you're in landscape mode. Every time I borrow this phone from my wife to try to get accustomed to it, I'm overwhelmed by the feeling that this is the perfect form factor. I'm again surprised by the extremely nearly bezel-less screen, and by the general high quality of it all. Everything about this phone is very well balanced. So that's just something you have to keep in mind. Even after 2 weeks of playing with it on and off, it continues to amaze me how well made this device is, and just how nearly perfect it is in a lot of ways. Especially, again, when you consider the price of this phone, but I'll get to that later. Now the screen I want to mention again, it is very bright and it's adequate enough to use outside, but it's slightly less bright than the Huawei Mate 20X. I find that during a very sunny day, the screen might be a little bit harder to see, but it's still more than bright enough. It's more than adequate enough, and you'll be fine watching YouTube or taking photos and looking at photos, whatever it is you need to be doing. This screen will serve you well. And also the front-facing camera, gimmicky as it is still such a little fun factor with this phone. So the user interface is also very slick and swift. Xiaomi has been very careful not to bloat it up too much and to maintain all the functionality of Android and to add a little bit on top of that as well. So we do have our own version of quick gestures, for example, in the form of this quick ball, I think it's called, that you can slide from the side of your screen, and you can open it up to quickly access some of the device's functions. So you can customize all of these buttons. In my case, I have the torch, I have a long press of the power button, I have a button to quickly clear the cache, and a screen snippet button, as well as the camera. So I find this to be pretty handy. This is nice. It's always good to have additional ways to access your phone's functions. And in general, I do like the UI. I still find it to be a little bit slower than Huawei's, but it comes down to animation speed. So this phone just has animations in places where Huawei wouldn't. So just for example, sliding down from the top of the screen to reveal your device status and shortcuts. When you slide it on the Xiaomi, it feels very slick. You have this sort of blurred transition that slowly encompasses your entire screen. But when you do this, I don't know, it feels kind of slow, whereas on the Huawei, it's just the standard pull-down, drop-down menu. Right, so switching over to what I don't really like about this phone, one of the things is ads. There are ads hidden throughout the user interface, which is a major bummer for me, but it doesn't really come as a surprise from Xiaomi because I do have their TV in my living room, and they've had ads there for quite a while when you're switching between interfaces and on the home screen as well. But I would really prefer that manufacturers didn't head in this direction. But again, you have to consider the fact that there are several factors to look at when you're buying a new phone, one of the most important of which is value. And with value, of course, you have to take into consideration the price point and the actual real-world performance of your phone. So the price point of this phone is $600, the starting price point, whereas for all the other top-tier phones, they're trying to kind of push the $1,000 barrier. Just like any other private company, their main goal, their end goal, is to make money, to be profitable. This is something that might be a major turnoff for other users, but I can live with this. I'll get around this. I'll just end up blocking the ads, the APIs that they use to pull the ads into the system, and I'll be done with that. But for other users, you have been warned. You can come across ads where you're not expecting them with this phone. Another little quirk that I want to talk about is the camera. I'm not going to say that I don't like this camera, because that's just not the case. It is a very high quality camera that takes high quality photos. They're very bright, they're very well detailed, and I would generally say that they're what you would expect from a high-end device in this day and age. All the modern phones that we've seen lately are just so similar. The photos that you get from them are so similar, and by the time you get around to uploading your photos to Instagram or to Google Photos, you've usually applied a slew of effects to them anyway, which makes pixel peeping kind of pointless. But I find that just like with the Huawei Mate 20X, this camera was a little bit overhyped, nearly as being the best camera on any smartphone out there right now. I'm just not sure that is the case. It is a fantastic camera that takes fantastic photos. You subconsciously expect this camera to be so good that it just blows you away. And, well, it's just not the case. Coming from any other top-tier device with a high-quality sensor built this last year or so, these photos are going to seem better. They're going to seem very nice, but they're not going to blow you away as being the best photos you've ever seen on a smartphone. And that's especially true of the AI assistant. So I try to leave the AI assistant on to try to figure out what kind of scenes are being taken and try to optimize the photos, just like most users would too. But to be honest, I just don't see any difference with AI turned on or off. The photos turn out to be relatively the same. In any case, I don't want to fool you into thinking that this camera is bad in any way. It is, again, a high-quality camera, and you're going to enjoy the photos that you take on this device. And when it works well, and it often does, you're going to very much enjoy the photos that you've taken. What I do, however, like about this camera is the 4K 60 FPS. So I'm used to shooting everything at 4K 60, and it's just much smoother. It seems much more lifelike to me. So compared to the Huawei Mate 20X, this camera is definitely better in that regard. You get smoother video when shooting 4K 60, obviously. If you have a similar scene shot in the dark on the Huawei Mate 20X and the Mi Mix 3, in the case of the 20X, you're going to have a generally brighter picture where you can make out the fine details better, but it's going to be a lot smoother on the Mi Mix 3. Which is more preferable and more important to you? Again, you have to decide as the end consumer. So both of these phones are very quick with anything that you throw at them. So it doesn't matter if you're playing a game. It doesn't matter, again, if you're multitasking, if you're watching videos, if you're using TeamViewer to access some sort of external device. Graphically, they're both fantastic. There's no lag in any games that I've installed and tried during these past few weeks. So in general, I'm very happy with how these devices perform, and I don't see any difference, although, again, they have completely different processors. They have two different versions of Android, 8.0 and 9.0, and they have, again, different manufacturers, so different overlays, and a lot of ways that these devices can differ performance-wise, but that's just not the case. They're almost identical. So you can see graphically there's little to no difference in what you get, what kind of picture you have with these phones, and lag is non-existent on either device. Now, leaving the app and heading home, it's just as quick on any phone. You can switch over to another app, and it will very quickly launch that. Again, as far as I can tell, there is no difference in device performance. It's very snappy in general. So these devices are very fast, very quick at doing what they need to do. Although in the case of the Huawei Mate 20X, not all the apps always use the entirety of the screen. You have to manually go into your screen settings and force the apps to go full screen in order to avoid the notch. Loading times are also very quick, so loading up any sites is going to be just about identical on these two phones. And multitasking between other apps that you've opened previously is also going to be just as snappy, just as quick on both phones. You're not going to have any issues with that. So all in all, I would say these phones are identical in regards to performance. And when you look at these two phones, I think from a value point of view, the Mi Mix 3 is the best value you can get for your dollar. So at punch per dollar, if you can put it that way, the Mi Mix 3 is definitely the way to go. But if you want the best of the best, if you want the slightly better camera, if you want the slightly bigger screen, if you want the louder sounding stereo music, but you're ready to also pay quite a hefty premium for all of that, then the Huawei Mate 20X is definitely the route for you. So once again, I'd like to thank you guys very much for your time, for taking a look at my video. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And also, if you have any questions or comments, I'm always more than happy to answer you. Regardless of which phone you choose and which phone you go into 2019 with, I certainly hope that your device will serve you well. So thank you for watching, and see you guys next time.